Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, Vanessa will be our speaker. Most of you know Vanessa Able. She's been practicing with us for a few years, and before that, practiced in Great Britain. Vanessa, how long have you been practicing again? Wait, let me make sure you're on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I started in 2001. 2001.
Wow.
19 years.
Wow, so almost 2 decades. So she has a lot of experience, and I'm really excited because today she's going to be talking about everything I needed to know I learned in a Zen kitchen. So those of you who have never had Vanessa's cooking, she's an amazing chef. So I'm really excited for this talk. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you, Bonnie. Everything I know I learned in a Zen kitchen is not true at all. It was a misleading title that I put out. It was just kind of clickbait, really, to get everybody interested. I didn't learn everything, but I did learn a lot of things. And I was inspired to talk on this subject tonight since I think a lot of us, I know I have been thinking about the meaning of practice and the challenges of practice in our lives during a time when our physical place of meditation practice is not available to us. Sometimes practicing at home can feel like a struggle, and it's easy to slip into feeling that we're failing to maybe achieve something, or we start worrying about how many hours we're putting in on the cushion. So tonight I wanted to talk about a part of the Zen tradition that can guide us in practice, and possibly even take us into other rooms of the house. So most of you are probably familiar with the Tenzo Kyokun. The title, the Tenzo Kyokun, means a lesson from the monastery cook. And it's a text written in the 13th century by Japanese master Dogen. And I find it a very touching text in some ways, because it was inspired by a man who credits as being one of the most influential people on his practice, even though they only met a couple of times and very briefly. And that man was a Tenzo. He was a temple cook. The Tenzo Kyokun is a wonderful text, and what I'm going to do, if I can, in the chat, is post for you. There's a link there for later for the text. There was a full translation of it that featured in Tricycle magazine a while back, and I thought it was a very nice translation of it. So that's a resource there for anybody who wants to read it later. It's in the chat section. So unlike a lot of Dogen's other more challenging writings, denser writings in the Shobogenzo, the Tenzo Kyokun is short and relatively easy to understand. It contains a lot of sort of surprisingly direct instructions about what the Tenzo and the kitchen should and shouldn't be doing in the context of the temple, down to really small details like how sand should be washed out of rice and exactly how the rice soup should be cooked. The Tenzo Kyokun means a lot to me personally, as I have spent a lot of time in Zen kitchens, not always by choice, but that's what ended up happening. And a lot of these times I used to wish that I could be in the Zendo practicing and meditating, but I was lucky enough to be working under Tenzos who reminded me that the locus of practice was precisely where we were and what we were doing right there at that very moment. So back to Dogen. Dogen traveled to China in the first place because he felt that Zen in Japan was lacking something, and he was searching for a deeper practice. He was looking for a true master. And he had a question that no one he'd met up until that point had been able to answer for him in a satisfactory way. And his question was something like, why practice? Like, if we are to accept the world the way that it is, and we accept ourselves the way that we are, why do we make efforts towards meditation, study, and trying to better ourselves? When he arrived in China, Dogen had some immigration issues. He didn't have all his papers in order, so he needed to stay on the ship that he arrived on for a good 3 months until his issues were sorted out. So it gave him a lot of time to sort of mooch about and meet people. And the ship that he was on was a merchant ship, so it had imported some goods from Japan, and so there were people who would come to peruse the goods on the ship. And one day, an old monk arrived on the ship, and he was looking to buy some produce. And this monk had walked 12 miles from a monastery on the mountain in order to buy these ingredients for a meal. And he was a very old man, and he was bent over, and it was clear he was very tired from the journey. So this monk was the Tenzo that I mentioned earlier. Dogen was instantly drawn to him, and despite the language barrier, he invited him to spend the night there with him so that they could talk. He really wanted to talk to him. He really felt that this man had a lot to teach him. The Tenzo politely declined Dogen's offer, and he said he had to get back to the temple to cook the monk's meal. And Dogen was insistent. He really wanted to talk some more to the old man. So he started asking him, well, why was it so important that he needed to get back to the kitchen? It was just dinner after all. You know, couldn't somebody else step in? Couldn't they order in? But the monk explained that the role of the Tenzo was an important one, and that he couldn't just take the night off. And Dogen was intrigued. Here was this wise old man who should be spending his time maybe studying, meditating, reading the sutras. And instead, he was locked away in the kitchen doing very hard work. He asked him why he would allow this activity to distract him from his practice. And the Tenzo replied that rather than being a distraction from his practice, his work in the kitchen was the fulfillment of many years of dedicated study. The Tenzo felt kindly towards this young foreigner, young Dogen, who had so many questions. And he said to him, "You don't yet understand practice or the meaning of the words of ancient masters." Dogen had no idea what the man was talking about. He wanted to know more, but finally he had to leave. And then by coincidence, a few months later, they met again at a monastery up on the mountain. Dogen was delighted to see the old Tenzo again. He told him he'd spent a lot of time thinking about their previous encounter and what it was that the old man had meant by the things that he'd said to Dogen. So the Tenzo said to him this time, "To study words, you must know the origin of words, and to endeavor in practice, you must know the origin of practice." And then Dogen famously has an exchange with the old man where he asks him, "What are words?" And the old man replied, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Dogen finally asked him, "What is then practice?" And the Tenzo said, "Nothing in the entire universe is hidden." So Dogen was deeply affected by his meeting with the Tenzo. And years later, after he returned to Japan and established his own monastery, he wrote the Tenzo Kyokun. The Tenzo Kyokun tells us that attention to the simplicity of daily work is in itself spiritual practice. The enlightenment is embodiment, life set in motion, an attitude that was present in every activity. And although this teaching cannot be given in words, it can't be fully explained in words, words are part of the teaching and cannot be separated from our human experience and our understanding. The Tenzo Kyokun also tells us that the kitchen is the heart of the temple. And as head of the kitchen, the Tenzo is the person who sets the tempo of the beat. The Tenzo is not just any old chef. He is not even the best trained Michelin star chef. According to Dogen in the Tenzo Kyokun, the position of Tenzo is held by accomplished monks who have way-seeking minds or by senior disciples with an aspiration for enlightenment. This is so because the position requires wholehearted practice. The first Tenzo I ever met was at the La Gendronnière temple in France. This is the main temple of the Deshimaru lineage in Europe. It was about 1.5 years into my practice. So my teacher in France, whose name is Guy Mercier, he suggested that I go work in the kitchen. And I just arrived, it was my first day there, and he explained to me that the kitchen was a very special place for him, as he himself had spent many years as a Tenzo for Master Deshimaru in the 1970s. I was a little reluctant to go in the kitchen initially. I was a student at the time, and I lived with my friends, and we never really cooked much beyond eggs and bacon and pasta and things, toast. And so I walk into this like huge industrial kitchen, and there's a man standing over the stove, quietly stirring something, and he's introduced to me as the Tenzo. And I spent the next 10 days working closely together with him, and through him and this experience, I got my first taste of what this kind of practice in action, practice with work, could really mean. So this first sesshin in the kitchen was quite small. There wasn't many people on the sesshin, so it didn't warrant a lot of people being in the kitchen. And when I knocked off to take a break or to sit zazen, more often than not, the Tenzo would stay in the kitchen and continue working. And I remember one day, like innocently asking him the same question that I suppose Dogen had asked his first Tenzo. Well, wouldn't you rather be in the Zendo? And he just sort of smiled and said that, well, working in the kitchen was zazen for him. And I had a lot of trouble understanding that at the time. To me, zazen was the tremendous effort that I felt I made when I sat in the Zendo, when I was meditating. How could zazen have anything to do with boiling potatoes or chopping carrots? But in that quiet kitchen over the next few days, the Tenzo taught me that it had everything to do with it. He taught me about knives and various cutting boards, about taking tremendous care over cutting, slicing, chopping, dicing, about taking care with the produce and treating it with respect, and about keeping the kitchen organized and clean. He taught me how to have the patience to make a real French bechamel, which when you're making a large one for a lot of people involves at least anything between 1 hour and 2 hours, stirring constantly above the stove, as well as the traditional Japanese rice soup called genmai that is eaten for breakfast at the Gendronnière and a lot of temples and places in the Deshimaru lineage. It's kind of a thick rice soup with little bits of vegetables inside, or pickled vegetables. And then when there was no more cooking to be done for the day, the Tenzo talked to me about rugby and his favorite philosopher, who was Spinoza, who I knew nothing about. So it reminds me, there's this little section in the Tenzo Kyokun that brought to mind this experience. Dogen writes, when you wash rice and prepare vegetables, you must do it with your own hands and with your own eyes, making sincere effort. Do not be idle even for a moment. Do not be careful about one thing and careless about another. Do not give away your opportunity, even if it is merely a drop in the ocean of merit. You do not fail to place even a single particle of earth at the summit of the mountain of wholesome deeds. So that first sesshin in the kitchen, I really enjoyed that. And I remember telling somebody that And they said to me that I should keep quiet about how much I enjoyed it, unless I wanted to spend the rest of my Zen life in the kitchen. Because the popular wisdom went that once you spent some time in the kitchen and got a modicum of training, it was almost impossible to leave. And sure enough, the next time I visited that temple a few months later, my name on the rota. And this was a period of summer camp when the temple filled out with people. So they would have 6 10-day summer camps back to back. And any one of these sessions could have as many as 300 people partaking in the session at a time. So the kitchen then was a whole different proposition. It was no longer the quiet, intimate place of practice I had known until then. And it was a maelstrom of culinary endeavor, a hothouse of food production, 3-course meals that had to be put out 3 times a day on an exacting schedule. The kitchen team would then be composed of maybe a dozen to 15 people. Most of them were men, and many of them had 0 kitchen experience, like not even boiling eggs at home. We were all under the instruction of a tenzo, who would have been an experienced monk, but still someone who had dropped into the position like that day or the day before, and had most likely been working a completely different desk job halfway across Europe just a few days earlier. So it was a very sudden new experience for everybody. And what really strikes me now when I think back to those sessions is how the miracle of transmission occurred and how quickly. There's a line in the Tenzo Kyokun about the magic of transformation that reminds me of what occurred in those situations. It says, taking up a green vegetable, turn it into a 16-foot golden body. Taking a 16-foot golden body and turn it into a green vegetable leaf. This is a miraculous transformation, a work of Buddha that benefits sentient beings. I used to joke that we were more like a reality show, a random group of completely unskilled people, often speaking several different languages and not necessarily having any in common, that were thrown into a task that expected immediate results. It was the job then of the Tenzo to put this rabble to work under a punishing schedule and an attempt at the rigorous enforcement of Dogen's pure standards for the Zen Kitchen. The first day was always a challenge, but it was amazing to me how quickly we managed to pull it together. Somehow we always managed to get the meals out on time and stave off most of the major kitchen disasters. And at the end of every 10-day camp, the team would switch out, or most of the team would switch out, and the cycle would begin again. And somehow I just always was the person who stayed. In order to get the food prepared on time in a mindful and measured way, we were organized into chains of production. So sometimes there'd be as many as 50 platters to get out hot into the dining hall in the space of a few minutes. And the Tenzo required that they look a certain kind of way with a particular kind of garnish. It was work that asked intense concentration and speed, and you had every potential of spilling over into panic. When the Zazen wood struck for meditation and the rest of the Sangha headed over to the Zendo, I'd be in the kitchen watching them longingly from the window. It was tiring work, and I itched to sit down and take a break. I remember a few people on the kitchen team even complained. They'd paid all this money to come on a meditation retreat, and instead, they were being worked to a pulp in the kitchen. It was easy for me then to miss the deeper points of the value of kitchen practice and to get caught up in my own fatigue. But looking back, I know now that it laid the groundwork for my stamina in the practice. The Tenzo Kyokun talks about stamina and the rigor that needs to be given to one's practice, and that the Tenzo needs to be present for all activities on the monastic schedule. Sometimes I'd be so exhausted at the end of the day that I actually mastered the skill of falling asleep upright on my zafu during the evening meditation. But not going to the Zendo was never an option. Somehow it made sense. For better or worse, this was my practice. Someone asked me once, probably while I was complaining, why didn't I ask for another job? When I really considered it, though, it just wasn't appealing to me. Digging in the garden or cleaning the bathroom didn't quite hold the same intense appeal. For better or worse, the kitchen was where it was at for me. I remember how strong the tenzos were during these periods and what their comportment taught me. The tenzo was the first person in and the last person out of the kitchen, and great attention was paid to detail. There was one wonderful tenzo who took a lot of care in his measurements. He was always ready with a measuring tape and a pencil and paper or a calculator, and he would measure the volume of a particular soup. He'd measure the diameter and the height, and he'd figure out exactly how many ladles that pot would give and how that translated to the head count that he had for that particular meal. So that there were charts everywhere and numbers. And at first I sort of thought this was excessively compulsive or fastidious, but then I sort of gradually realized the method, that it seemed that at every meal we always had just enough food and hardly any leftovers. And I know it's definitely not an easy balance to strike when you have, dozens, if not hundreds of people to feed. And there's a couple of very detailed paragraphs in the Tenzo Kyokun about the importance of measuring just the right quantity of food but just the right number of people, and how to count the people and how to measure those quantities, because ideally there should be no waste as a result of carelessness. So at some point, my teacher took an insane risk and thought that I was ready to serve as Tenzo myself at some of the sessions he led in England and France. When he could see that I was reluctant and nervous at the prospect of so much responsibility, he supported me a lot by helping plan menus and giving advice about Zen Kitchen management. He was very insistent on simplicity. I always have this tendency to get very ambitious with the kinds of dishes I want to make, and they end up being very work intensive and time consuming. But he showed me the beauty of a well sliced cucumber salad and a plate of just very simply steamed vegetables. And this did not in any way mean cutting corners either. He would not allow me to bring canned produce like beans, for example. Everything would have to be pre-soaked and cooked the proper way. No pre-prepared fruit yogurts or sauces. Everything should be made by the Tenzo in the sesshin kitchen, and the meals should be well thought out and always balanced. That was important. On sesshin, food should not be too spicy or difficult to digest. And I learned that in Japanese temple kitchens, it would be unusual to maybe even find garlic or onions in the temple pantry. The very strong food, very strong taste. This was not the case in France, however. It would have probably been considered an affront to national sensibility, the absence of onions. But another important lesson was just don't get cocky. When the meals were consistently started coming out on time and the compliments started trickling in, I began to think I was crushing it in the kitchen. I thought I was great. I became very bold and I let my guard down. And a couple of incidents happened on the same sesshin that showed me, that put a mirror up to myself. One of them was funny. One afternoon, I prepared all the food for dinner way ahead of time. I was ahead of myself. I was very fast. And everything I made, I put in a large bowl on the kitchen counter. I might have covered it with a little plastic or something. And then I thought, I'll just go outside and chat with my friends. And I have no idea how it happened, but when I returned to the kitchen, a dog had gotten in to the kitchen, and I just found him with his sort of face just rummaging in this bowl, which he'd actually upended onto the floor, and the entire dinner was either on the floor or in the dog's mouth. And we were about an hour off dinner service time, so I was mad with myself and with the dog, but mostly with myself. And on the same session, something that was not in the least bit funny happened, and it could have ended much worse than it did. There was a girl that had nut allergies, and she would come into the kitchen a couple of hours before every meal to check with me what I was making. And I would then tell her whether or not there were nuts in the food. And one time she came in and I was very, very busy. There were lots of things going on, and my mind slipped. I forgot that we were making a salad that would have walnuts in it. And I neglected to tell her that. And she ate it, and she did not have to go to hospital, but she was very sick for the next 24 hours. And this was a huge, huge wake-up call for my own negligence and my own attention. So tonight I've invoked these stories in the spirit of gratitude for the teaching I've received in the kitchen, for the opportunity to practice an embodiment in some ways of the Dharma in an environment that was challenging, for sure, but also always nurturing. One of the things I've loved about visiting Tassajara here in California has been the opportunity to work in the kitchens there. And one of the many things I really appreciated about that experience was during the work period, the Tenzo at one point about halfway through would have us all stop, and we would perform a ceremony in the kitchen. And that would then be followed by a reading of an extract from the Tenzo Kyokun and a short discussion. And I thought this was wonderful. I really felt like the teaching of the Tenzo Kyokun was being kept very much alive in the kitchen in Tassajara. So I'm going to end with a quote from the ending, towards the end of and it's the quote Dogen himself puts into the text. He says, a teacher of old said, 2/3 of your life has passed, not polishing even a spot of your source of sacredness. You devour your life. Your days are busy with this and that. If you don't turn around at my shout, what can I do? You should know that if you have not met a true master, you will be swept away by human desire. What a pity. It's like the foolish son of the wealthy man who carries a treasure from his father's house and discards it like dung. You should not waste your time as that man did. When you long for enlightenment and follow the way, even taking sand and offering it to Buddha is beneficial. Drawing a figure of Buddha and paying homage also has an effect. How much more so to be in the position of Tenzo? If you act in harmony with the minds and actions of our ancient predecessors, how can you fail to bring forth their virtue and practice?
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
So
if there's any questions or comments or recipe suggestions, I'd love to hear them.
Peter?
Thank you, Vanessa. I found that very, very inspiring. I want to go and tidy my kitchen and make sure that I prepare my breakfast with more care and attention. I was wondering if one thing that I find is that I try to bring a level of attention and focus and diligence to for example, particularly when I'm working in the kitchen, washing dishes or preparing breakfast, preparing coffee, making dinner. But it sometimes feels like tiring, repetitive, drudgery. I find myself wanting to be doing something else, and I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how to maintain that dedication, or to maintain that kind of spirit of attention day after day, hour after hour.
My feeling would be slow down, just slow the whole thing down, and neaten it up, square things off. I think the kitchen, your home kitchen it's a place where you're often on your own. It's often quiet. It's something where you tend to do very repetitive things that you've done many, many times before. But it's also a place of just such immense detail and phenomena and such energy and transformation that happens. And I think when you start to look at that, it's quite hard not to be amazed by it. Every little thing you pull out of your fridge, everything you engage with, I would encourage just looking at things in more detail. You think you know an onion, but when you really start taking it apart, dissecting things, that kind of curiosity. I think when we think we're very familiar with certain things, and kind of re-invoke that beginner's mind. But for me, I think when I sort of had, when I had somebody just take the knife out of my hands and just sort of show me this beautiful way of cutting, for example, that I still take so much pleasure in. I'm not a complete, but I'm about as much of a knife snob as I can afford to be, because that can become an expensive habit. But just a good knife, nothing like a good knife. It's a wonderful feeling, and you really do justice to what you're doing if you have good tools, quality tools and things that you love. Things that you can care for, and maybe things that you have to maintain. Like I have a bunch of wooden chopping boards that I need to oil every month. They dry out. You can have plastic ones and not worry about that. But there's something about after you've oiled them that they just become that much more intimate with you, and that much, just that much closer to your heart. So, yeah. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Dave.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for your talk. The whole idea of losing focus in the kitchen, or losing focus more generally, losing focus in the Zendo or in any other aspect of your life. It reminds me, there was a talk by a guest speaker at the Old Cannondale about 15 years ago, a fellow named Alan Liu. And he just took the challenge of that head on, about how we should face that, particularly the feeling when we suddenly realize that we've lost focus, and oh dear, we have to get focused again. He said that the critical thing is to recognize that this is really the heart of practice, that when you realize that you've lost focus, the worst thing you can do is to punish yourself and feel guilty and yell at yourself, bad meditator, I lost focus, oh dear. But instead say to yourself, I'm back. I've always remembered that wonderful remark from Alan Liu, and I found it very helpful to avoid beating myself up and instead say, I'm back.
That is lovely. I love that gesture too. I'm back. I missed you. I'm back. Thank you. David.
It's an honor to be able to ask a question in front of the Kannon people. It's been way many years since I was attending the Wednesday evening sessions there. So it's an honor to see the group thriving so well. I spent a couple Sangha weeks at Tassajara and worked in the kitchen and did many of those rituals. You mentioned the reading of the Tenzo thing in the middle of work period. And in one episode, the group of us chopping vegetables made a tremendous mistake. It's kind of a droll story, I won't go into it, and we were not there long enough to see the effect on the kitchen or on the meals that were presented at dinner of this huge consumption of scallions, months worth of scallions. My question to you, Vanessa, is what's your experience of making mistakes? We know the meal's not prepared in a pure linear fashion.
No, that's really true. I think when, especially in those days that I talked about, when we were a team under a Tenzo and it was very, very chaotic, obviously lots of mistakes like that would happen. The wrong things would get chopped in insane quantities or I don't know. I remember one time we had a lot of spaghetti to cook, and we literally filled up this kind of bath that they had with water that you had to start boiling the water about 2 hours before you actually needed it because there was just such a huge quantity. And my one job was that was given to me by the Tenzo was just to put the cook the spaghetti. It's 9 minutes in the water, you take it out, Bob's your uncle. And I neglected to stir it enough, and everything just clumped together, and the whole spaghetti just cooked and it just came out like a lump like this. And the Tenzo at the time, who's quite a good friend of mine now, I remember just watching the way that he dealt with that. That he sort of went through these phases of just rage and acceptance, and then kind of like, okay, damage control, what do we do? And funnily enough, we were writing to each other recently. I mean, this would have happened like 15 years ago, and he mentioned the incident again. I think it struck him so deeply, it scarred him. He's never forgotten it. And I remember feeling, deeply awful. I mean, I would take these things very, very much to heart. I would often get scolded for doing things wrong or for not paying enough attention, for burning something, for, not having done something that I was told to do, because I suppose, there was a lot of high energy running around in the kitchen. And I think taking that on the nose was part of the practice. It was sort of understanding that that the Tenzo wasn't any worse for responding with anger. It was a very tense situation. I think the onus was on us to be able to take that and learn from it, and continue and not take it too much to heart. And from that, I learned from the people that that were in the position of working. I remember another time we made the meal and we were sitting out in this dining hall in complete silence. You could hear a pin drop, you know, everybody's eating in complete silence. And suddenly one of the servers came up to the tenzo and people were eating salad that we prepared, and he was holding a little napkin, and he opened the napkin to show the tenzo something that had been found in the salad. And it was so bizarre. It was like a lock of hair this thick, as if somebody had just cut off a ponytail from somebody and put it in the salad, like in a huge clump. I mean, it was absolute mystery where this came from. And I just remember seeing the tenzo's face just go white, absolutely white. And he just took it and he like placed it on his knee and he just continued eating it. And it was never spoken of again, you know. So I think just, you know, watching the dignity with which other people kind of dealt with those moments was very enriching as well. Thank you for your question. And so nice to have you here. Welcome back. I'm so glad you could make it. Oh, should we take Elizabeth and then Carolina? Elizabeth?
Oh, I guess I'm on.
Yeah, you're first,
Sorry.
Carolina.
You're on.
Thank you, Vanessa, for such a lovely, lovely talk. I got a lot out of it, and have learned that I need to slow down in the kitchen. And I'm also wondering if there is a plan B when there are disasters. What do you do when there's a disaster? Is there enough food? What happens?
You rely on the marvelous practice of the people that you're cooking for in their capacity to accept your mistakes. Yeah, I think ultimately, you know, that's what happens. In a couple of extreme situations that I've witnessed, you know, it's just that sometimes there's a plan B in that there might be some leftovers, you know, there might be some extra food that you could just wheel out at the last moment. But I think for the most part, it's just it's the relationship of the rest of the group to the kitchen, and understanding that it can never be a perfect process, and mistakes will be made, and something might get burnt along the way. Spaghetti will stick together.
Do you start over again with a new meal?
If you have time.
Okay.
But there's a bell that rings and there's a dinner service that starts, so food needs to be produced.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Wonderful to see you.
You too.
Carolina?
Thank you for your talk. I'm wondering, how many of the meals are oryoki style?
In Europe?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. When I trying to get back so I can see you. When I first started practicing, there was no oryoki at all. So back in just at the turn of the millennium, what we would do is just everybody was instructed just to bring one bowl from home, and then we'd have the oryoki style napkins and the covering. So you just have your one bowl with a spoon, and you would have a cleaning cloth inside, and then a lap napkin, and then the napkin on top. And that it was like that for the first few years. And then gradually, I think some people started to bring in something more oryoki style, but with, I want to say with I don't know, is it 7 bowls? That's the full set. 5 bowls, it's the full set. Anyway, a larger set, and I would see those sort of start to come out, but it was never unified. I never saw it unified. I left in 2000, gosh, when? 2014. I never saw oryoki being practiced the way it's practiced here. That was new for me. So usually when you brought out a meal, you would just give a large bowl of food to a group of 6 people, and then there would be a first, second, and third course all eaten out of the same bowl.
Oh.
That was usually how it worked. Yeah. And then the bowl would be cleaned in the same way.
And this
Sorry?
is the Zendo?
This is at the temple.
Dinner meals, are they happening in the Zendo?
No, that would, no. There was a big dining hall next to the kitchen. Yeah, I never saw that either, a meal in the Zendo. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, and great talk, Vanessa. We might have more time at the end, but we actually have a quick announcement. So I'm sorry, we have to switch to the announcement. Nicholas is going to make an announcement today. Wow, there's so many people, so I'm trying to find you, Nicholas, to unmute you. There you are, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have an announcement. Does anyone know what is happening this week?
I don't know, Nick, can you tell us what's happening?
It's someone's birthday. Does anyone know whose birthday it is?
I have no idea. I have no idea at all.
It's Les's birthday.
What? Awesome. Thank you, Nicholas. We just want to wish you a happy birthday, Les.
Happy birthday.
How do I make it bigger?
Here, you're spotlighted now.
Okay.
Wait, there looks like there's someone next to you. Who is that? Hi, Mary. Hi, Mary.
Oh,
Gorgeous cake.
We tried to plan the timing. We kind of succeeded.
well, I'm very touched, and I'm very touched by your wishes and your sense of community tonight. You know, I've always said we should keep technology out of the Zendo, but the piano was a welcome instrument tonight. Thank you, Nick, for performing for us, and thank you all for your best wishes. To tell you the truth, it helps a lot during this time where things can feel maybe not as good as we'd like. It was wonderful, and I much appreciate your thoughts. Thank you. And I would love to invite you over to have a piece of cake, but another time.
Yeah.
You just have to eat a slice for every single one of us. So.
Okay.
This was handmade by Jaya.
Oh, it's from Jaya.
Yes, she made it from scratch.
Thank you, Jaya. Where are you? I'm going to show you.
Beautiful cake. Look at this raspberry.
Wow, it's wonderful. There she is. Hi, thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
And there it is.
Now, I wish there was some way we could all share it. Oh my.
This is cards, I believe.
Okay, maybe I'll do this another time.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, like I say, I'm very touched, and I'm very grateful to all of you for your friendship and your dedication, your good heart, your big-hearted dedication to our practice. And Mary just showed me a knife and some plates.
And forks.
And forks.
Well,
hopefully we're starting to move towards reopening, and I hope that can happen in a not too distant future so that we can all be together again in person and we can see each other's smiling faces. Thank you.
Thank you, Les. All right. Sorry to have cut that short, but happy birthday, Les. I do want to give people a chance if anyone wants to still ask more questions since we cut it a little bit short, or make any comments. Feel free to continue the conversation. Rene, and then Jaya.
Hi, Vanessa. Thanks for the beautiful story and happy birthday, Les.
Thank you.
I've never really done anything in the kitchen, although it intrigues me, but my style for now has been to avoid it and run away when I'm called. But I do have a question about your story as it relates to my own activities. So I've experienced many times in using your story, you had to prepare a meal and you had the tools, and you talked about having good tools and enjoying the tools. But how do you manage or balance what's more important in the sense, are you doing the deed and producing the outcome for the pleasure of using the tools? Or are the tools just the means? And yes, it's fine that they're good, but you don't really pay any attention to them, which you obviously do, and so do I. So where's that balance in the case of Nick, right? There's the music and there's the piano. My mom was a concert pianist. I saw he has a Steinway, so you can't go better than that. But how do you manage that relationship? Because in my case, I've fallen very often in the trap of the tool being more important than the activity, if I may say so. So what's your take on that? And of course, related to the practice, obviously.
Yeah, I can relate. It's a wonderful question for me. I think about, or a riddle about quality. It's something that I guess I think about a lot. You know, like where true quality lies. And I think if you're, well, I suppose any kind of person that you know has a creative activity, it's very easy to become fetishistic about your tools. If you're a photographer, you know, if you're a musician, if even in the kitchen, you know, you don't need to spend $1,000 on a Japanese steel knife. You know, you can cook with something that's much less. And you know, going back to the Tenzo Kyokun, there's a lot that he says in there about not judging the materials that you have. You know, just literally just getting on, creating the magic, creating the 16-foot golden body out of the leaf that's in front of you, you know, and that transformation can happen no matter what you're using. But I think, you know, the more that you do use tools and the more you create, I think when you have the possibility to upgrade, it's very easy to go down that path and to lose yourself down that path too, and to begin to get put too much emphasis on the tools. Having said that, you know, there's great pleasure to be had, you know, when you do. I'm a big fan of good design. You know, when you come across good design, even if it's something very, very simple, you know, just something that's well oiled and it works and it doesn't need instructions and it's ergonomic and it's wonderful, you know, there's a coming together of intention and outcome that's wonderful. So I think it's sensing that line, you know, sensing that line when you've crossed over, you know, you're in the realm of fetishism, kind of being able to hold yourself back and just sort of know how much is good enough, you know, where it might start to get a little too much. That would be my feeling.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Giuseppe, but I know Jaya also had a question, so let's do Jaya and then Giuseppe. Go ahead, Jaya.
Vanessa, thank you. The talk was really beautiful. As you know, I love to cook too. So I guess my question is, something that I struggled with is in terms of, and first let me say that just being at Kannon, especially like at Tassajara on Saturdays when we get together for breakfast, has been such a inspired me on working in the kitchen and sort of just developing all the things you talked about. It's been just really, for me, is such a learning experience. Of course, I haven't been, at anywhere else besides that to learn the importance of this. My question is, one of the things that I always struggle with myself is focusing on the quality, like you mentioned, the tools and all of that, and then the importance of what you're actually doing just to provide nourishment for the Sangha. And obviously when you're at home, it's for the family or whoever it is you're cooking for. And to kind of, I've struggled with that in terms of, how do you put that together? And I still, sometimes I get so focused on doing it well and perfectly and using the right tools and forgetting what the end result is. And I feel like, is that the more important thing? What's your perspective on that?
I think bearing in mind where the product's going to come out, and I think in food it's lovely because it's so straightforward. It's something that's going to be enjoyed by a target group of people who you know who they are, and usually they're people that you love. So usually it's an act of love. Making food for somebody is an act of love, and I think that you always, that you bear in mind. When other creative process you use, at least ones that I'm involved in, often you make things and you send them out into the world and you don't know where they're going to land. And food isn't like that. Food is so straightforward, and it's consumed by the end of the day, and then you start again the next day. So I think if you hold that intention in your heart, I mean, you know what it's like to cook, to cook for your own children, and when your children are small, and you know that they need like a certain type of nourishment. And actually, children are a good example because they can't have anything, they won't tolerate anything too complicated. Things kind of need to be simple and they need to be nutritious. And I think that's the kind of guideline that I would, at least cooking, that I would do, something that is nutritious and simple, and that's not gonna bother the system, that is there to nourish, to give energy that the people can then go and sit the next session of Bhajan. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Giuseppe?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
So first of all, happy birthday, Les. And thank you, Vanessa, for the talk. I have a thought and a question. The thought is about our daily work that I think for many of us as an important intellectual side. So we work with our mind a lot, with our brains a lot, and sometimes less with our body during our daily activity. It's just the nature of modern society. And how then I have so this perception that of course we can bring all the teaching from the Tenzon book to our work, even if it's an intellectual type of work. If we bring now it's our thinking that needs to be like the cutting, the precise cutting of the vegetables. It's our thinking that needs to be purposeful and careful, and done with a lot of care, attention for all the details and all the people involved, and with a strong sense of purpose. And that really fills up all your brain. And so I would like to hear your little bit thinking on this, how the experience in the kitchen can translate into also our working in the daily life and our thinking, more like intellectual type of work, through this teaching.
Thank you, Giuseppe. I think you can see it as another type of work. I mean, I'm picking up on what you said about thoughts. When you come at it from the point of view of thoughts being your tools, thoughts are your material. Thoughts are there's a certain way of thinking that you work with, and that's your material. I think that these principles translate in a very similar way. I mean, I can take a lot of these principles.
We'll have some.
For example, from the kitchen, and translate them to things that I do, for example, in writing. I know that there are ways that I can set myself up where I'll be clearer, and that there are other ways that I'll put myself at a disadvantage. And often, this has to do with my physical surroundings. So literally, if the house is a mess, I cannot function. Like, things kind of need to be neat. That's just the way that it works for me. I need to be with my practice up to a certain point, and then I think that whatever you encounter, whatever kind of work comes up, whatever kind of activity comes up, the term used is embodiment. It embodies in that, and there's such a thing as moments of rushed, confused thoughts when your mind is racing and you can't make head or tail. But then those moments of clarity when you can use thought and ideas and then the intellectual process in a way that stopping from interview, and it's clean and you can slice through things. That's been my experience. Yeah.
I wanted to say something and ask you a little bit about I think it's really remarkable today that I ran into you while working at the supermarket and thinking a lot about the fatigue and having kind of a sort of a mixed day. Usually I've had such really nice times. Everybody's been on their best behavior and things, but I really appreciate the reminder of how essential just food is, and being the opportunity to appreciate being a part of bringing food to people, and that making food it's such an essential act of love, and the opportunity to kind of come back, after having been away and being distracted, the opportunity to come back on this while you're talking about work and presence, being present in your work, and the simplicity and clarity of that, and the balance between the tools and the outcome and all of that. I just wanted to say thank you, because I think it's nice to, as Dave said, to be back. Anyway, but also thinking about the fatigue, where even in the intellectual work, or what you were just saying, that getting to that point, there are times where you feel the point of clarity or flow that happens both in all kinds of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. Yeah.
I see Columbine. Yes. Go ahead, Columbine.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Vanessa, and very cool, Jay to make the cake, and the happy birthday song was very cool. Happy birthday, Les. You were talking about, taking great care of oiling your cutting boards, and it reminds me of my dad and my mom. They both like to cook a lot. But they have very different personalities, and my dad takes great care with things, as does my mom, but I know my mom will get much more attached to things. So if something were to say break, she would be distraught. Whereas with my dad, I don't know, he would probably just say, well, stuff happens, I need to get a new one. He wouldn't be, but that's not to say that he's careless. He's very careful with things. So I wonder for yourself, have you found yourself getting attached to things, and how do you not do that?
Yeah. It sounds like your mum and your dad balance out each other really well.
Well, actually, they've been apart for my entire life, so no.
Well, they don't know how well they could balance each other out.
Yeah.
Get attached to things. I mean, I think that what you just described there, you're describing two great approaches. The approach of sort of preservation, of, I guess, a little what I was talking about before. Developing relationships with the objects around you. I think it's something that's really important. I get very sad at this disposable culture. I think it's wonderful that we can have things that stay with us for years and years, and I think it creates a relationship of respect with objects. I remember that there's a quote from Alan Watts, something about that, about the irony of calling us a materialist culture when we're actually just so disrespectful to materials. we are the absolute, antithesis of materialism in that kind of literal way. So, but again, the line of, that there is a moment to let go, and there is a moment to accept that it's time for an object to leave your life, and to know when you're sort of projecting unnecessarily onto something, that it might be something else that you're projecting at that moment. So I think the ability to be able to let go of things, and to know when that, I suppose the wisdom is knowing when that moment, when it's appropriate, when that moment is the right moment to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Umar and Lee, did I see Umar?
So, Vanessa, one thing I wanted to say was going to ask this question, but just to address Renee's question. On YouTube, there's America's Test Kitchen, and they do great reviews of all the tools and utensils that you need, which are not expensive and very easy to get and helpful. And they do tests upon tests upon tests. So that's a great thing to look at. We always look at those videos. And that's one thing I wanted to share And I want to ask you, I don't know about you, but for me, recently what has happened is washing dishes has become my teacher. In a way, it tells me my state of mind that I'm in. So I can actually look at my state of mind while I'm washing my dishes and see if I find myself getting angry, frustrated, I'm happy, I'm sad, whatever's coming up, I can look at it in a very clear manner. But I don't know if this has ever happened to you while you were working in the kitchen.
Oh, I think I love hearing you say that, Umar, because I think that, I mean, it's not just dishes, is it? It's everything. It's everything we do. Like, you know, it's a conversation you've had with somebody. Like, you know when you've given it your best. You know when you've really come through, or you can read it in anything that you've produced, any work that you've done, a note that you've written to somebody, an email that you've written to somebody. You know when you've made that connection, and you know when you haven't. And I think that when you can see it, you might say of an artist, oh, you can see their depression in their work. Well, that's very obvious. But when you can see it in your dishes, I think that's wonderful. If you can see it in your vacuuming, if you can see it in the way that you made the bed this morning, I think that's great.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question, and thank you, Vanessa, for the lovely talk and the promising discussion. The question's kind of around not particularly the talk, but around this kind of virtual Sangha. And I just realized my setup here wasn't the most ideal. And I was thinking about that like a bit. And I was wondering if it would be worthwhile exploring while we have the virtual Sangha to put on headphones and unmute ourselves. It kind of gives us the feeling of being in the Zendo, in my humble opinion, because the headphones provide some kind of isolation, yet the sounds from the outside can seep in like when we sit in the Zendo like they do. And the other question I was wondering was with regarding to how people position their cameras. Would it be worthwhile not having it kind of face on while we're meditating, and maybe a profile kind of view when we're meditating? It's just and I apologize, my surroundings aren't the most optimal right now.
Oh, that's fine. I can hear you very well. So in terms of camera positioning, I'm not sure that there was any sort of official guidance that we suggested. I know that we did sort of think about maybe putting something like that out, but I don't think we did. So for the most part, I think when people are sitting, either they decide to switch off their camera altogether, so that the screen is not a distraction during Zazen. But some people like to keep the camera on, and that's also fine. And I think the angle at this point is it's just whatever you feel comfortable with and whatever's not going to distract you during the meditation. And in terms of, did you mean not muting ourselves during Zazen?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just that I think a lot of, I don't know, at least the way that it comes through on my computer, there's just a lot of kind of noise that's sort of unnatural and again, distracting. That's been my experience. So I find that if everybody keeps their microphones on, there'll be, I know it's a natural sound like the one we'd hear in the Zendo, but it's sort of amplified and quite jarring to hear, like even if there's a motorbike just going past a few meters ahead. So I think that's probably
You're breaking up a little bit, Vanessa.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
I don't know, Bonnie, if anybody else has anything to say about that. But
I have a quick comment on that. So, Omar, I totally sympathize with wanting to feel more together, right? It's a virtual experience. It's not quite the same. You can put the camera wherever you want, whatever angle. Some people actually do set it up so you get a side view, but most of us have been doing it front, but it's completely up to you. In terms of the audio, the challenge is when you have 30 people in 30 different locations, that if they were all unmuted, you get the background noise of all 30 locations, which could be motorcycles, all kinds of things going by. However, most of our sessions you're muted by default, but you are completely welcome to unmute yourself. Everyone is completely welcome to unmute yourself if you want to, and if you're in a reasonably quiet area. So if you want to sing, because I find that also if you want that in a way kind of accountability too, like you're not going to shuffle around and make noise if people could hear you the same way they could in the Zendo. So people are welcome to unmute themselves during Zazen as well, as long as you're in a quiet place. But in generally, we've been muting everyone because people are not always aware, or there could be background noise that you can't even control. So it is a real challenge. Having said that, we're hoping that we can start doing some in-person programs that are modified sometime soon and get that feeling back. But we're not quite there yet, but we're really hoping we can be soon.
I was wondering if I could respond to that.
Yeah.
I think we can lower the volume on our side, and all the ambient noise that comes through from other people's laptops could be muted down that way, or kind of close to muted down, and that could be a personal preference. I guess the only reason I'm asking for this is it would be good to hear some kind of audible human presence to kind of express that connectedness while we're sitting.
That's good feedback, Omar. I think maybe we can take that feedback that maybe the person who's facilitating or leading or speaking that day can consider unmuting themselves if they're in a quiet area. I think that's something that we can all think about. Yeah. Any other comments on that? Anyone?
Just that I hear you, Emma, about missing the human presence. You know, I hear you. I feel the same.
Yeah, I think on Zoom you can kind of normalize your input audio to make it quieter, like Omar was saying.
Yeah. I think the challenge is, though, that not everyone might know how to do it. So if one person lowers their volume, but it might make everyone have to fidget. So, but I do think it helps to have some ambient sound, like if the person maybe who's leading is not muted, and as long as they're not in a very loud area, right? So it's something that we can try to experiment with more.
Maybe we could get a recording of breathing. Have it as background noise, right? So sort of what you're hearing when you're in the Zendo at 5:30 a.m., you hear other people breathing.
That's cheating, Rene. It's not live, but
well, it's using a tool for a purpose or for an output.
That's true.
And yes, and to kind of add to what Rene said, it was, I guess what I was asking for is during Zazen and not during the lecture period.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, makes sense. Thank you for your suggestion.
Thank you.
Teresa?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Happy birthday, Les. Best wishes for the new year. And thank you, everybody who contributed to the surprise party. Vanessa, thank you for your talk. I was lucky to enjoy your food, so we're lucky to have you as the Tensa. You know, I recently read something about Ed Brown, a story about Ed Brown when he started in the first years at Tasahara. The kitchen wasn't so well organized, and he went to talk to Suzuki Roshi, and he told him, you know, the kitchen crew is terrible. They take a lot of bathroom breaks. They don't work hard enough. They just take food from the refrigerator. He told him, it's terrible, I don't know what to do. And then Suzuki Roshi told him, it takes a calm mind to see virtue. And then he reflected on that in a book he wrote. He said that, you know, if you find fault, you will find more fault. If you find virtue, you will find more virtue. So I wonder, how has that been for you, since, you know, in the kitchen, working in a stressful environment, you know, human interactions can get tense. How has that been? And what have you learned from that?
It was kind of interesting because like parallel to around the time when I first started going to the kitchens in France, I was also, as a student, I had a job in a restaurant in London, just as a waitress. So I wasn't working in the kitchen, but I was frequently in the kitchen, and I got a little hit about every 10 minutes or so of that atmosphere that was inside that restaurant kitchen. And wow, like, whew, you did not want to get wrong of the chef. And I mean, there's just something about kitchens that, you know, they are absolutely, they're just this hothouse of feeling, you know, and emotion and production and creativity, and emotions run so high. And yet it's sort of, it's kind of understood, you know, that this is the case. And I feel like in some way people feel that they can be a little freer with themselves and their reactions, and people are perhaps more generous with each other, more patient with each other, sort of, you know, knowing that things could kick off. I mean, some of the things that the chefs in the restaurant kitchen said to me, my goodness, you had to be very thick-skinned. So I think that I think it was, you know, it was easy. I remember moments of despondency. I remember being in tears. Like, you know, many times, where I just come to the end of my tether, and I didn't feel like, yeah, I didn't feel that I was connecting with the work or the people around me. And then and I think everybody kind of went through that at some point, you know, and I think that it's just I think it's just a fantastic experience. I think it's a really good teaching to go through something like that. When you see virtue, there's more virtue, you know, and then it's easy to get bogged down on the other side. I think it's very easy to just keep seeing things in a negative way, and negativity hits, and then all you can perceive is negativity. A sense of humor is a fantastic resource to have in that moment, and it's one of the reasons I like working in England more in the kitchen, because the English people had a really good sense of humor, and we'd always laugh, and sometimes even have a beer at the end of the night, and just not take things too seriously at the same time. Sincere but not serious. That would be the mantra. Thank you, Teresa.
Thanks, everyone. It's 9:20, so it is getting a little late, but I know we have a big group today, so I want everyone to feel they have a chance to speak. So if we have one last question, maybe, otherwise we can close it out.
Maybe Nick wants to play something else in the piano to end the evening on a high note.
Okay, one more, but just for Les. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to put out my tip jar.
Okay.
So, Les, I understand you're a big Chet Baker fan. Is that correct?
I think Les is on mute. Sorry.
He didn't hear you.
I didn't hear you, Nick.
So, Les, I just wanted to confirm you're a Chet Baker fan, correct?
Correct.
All right. So this is for you. One of Chet Baker's signatures, "My Funny Valentine."
Oh, okay.
Oh.
He's going to play Chet Baker for me.
Oh, okay.
Knows I'm a Chet Baker fan.
Wow. Thank you, Nicholas. That was
Thank you, Nick.
amazing.
My pleasure. Happy birthday, Les.
Thank you. Can you sing it?
You don't want me to sing.
Okay. Yeah.
That was really great, Nicholas. I could just feel how healing classical music is. You've inspired me that because it's a really stressful time. I personally am going to listen to classical music a lot more from now on. I think it'll help. I think
Good,
it'll.
I'm glad. I just want to give a shout out to the unofficial Kannon Party Planning Committee.
Yes.
So in particular, this all was the brainchild of Teresa, Jayashree, and Diane, and we had a lot of other people involved too. Vanessa, Bonnie, Travis. Forgive me if I'm leaving anyone out, but thank you so much for planning this, Teresa.
This was wonderful. Really, really wonderful.
Thank you, Nicholas. I hope we can have a full concert with you. Diane was thinking about having a soiree, maybe a fundraising event where we could have some music and poetry. So we'll recruit you for that if we do it.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for a wonderful talk. Thank you, Nicholas, for the music, and just everyone that helped plan tonight. It was really wonderful. We're going to close with the 4 vows, and then you can feel free to stay on and chat informally after that. So, Lee, let me unmute.
Just before we do, Bonnie.
That's right. Announcements.
Are there any announcements? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Sorry, I just keeping track of time. But you're right. I do have an announcement. Actually, next week I will be giving a talk, and the title is "Live in Peace." And I will be trying to address some of the challenging issues we're facing, but in a way that leaves enough space for us to be peaceful with it, which is a challenge. So live in peace. That's the title of my talk next week. Any other announcements? Craig.
Craig has an announcement.
Yeah.
Hello. I will keep it brief since we're very late. As Les mentioned earlier, we are working on plans to try and reopen certain in-person activities at Canada. And the more that we get into it, the more that we realize there's a lot of work, both in just understanding the things we need to do and how we adapt our practices. And then when we do reopen, there's going to be an increased volunteering burden for people to fulfill some of our new obligations to practice safely. So we're looking for volunteers to help out with that stuff. If you receive the weekly newsletter that Vanessa sends, the last one included a link to a forum where you can sign up and express your interest in volunteering in different ways, especially if you have any particular like skills or knowledge or experience that might be helpful in different ways, then that's especially welcome. But just extra pairs of hands or eyes and whatever you have pairs of is very welcome. So check out the last email if you're feeling in the volunteering mood. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Any other announcements? Thank you, everyone. You're now free to go, and you're free to stay on and chat if you want. Good night, Les.
Night, Les.
Birthday.
Wonderful to see you all.
Happy birthday, Les.
Thank you. Thanks, Janet.
Happy birthday, Les.
Peter.
Happy birthday, Les.
Thank you, Jaya.
Happy birthday, Les.
Thanks, thanks, Elizabeth.
Happy birthday, Les.
Hey, Kathy, long time no see. Great to see you.
Did you eat the cake already?
The whole thing?
Not yet.
Oh, that's amazing.